A man left his village 10 years ago to face the world. He plunged into the harsh reality of adulthood, buried under the weight of professional expectations. Burdened by endless responsibilities, he rarely enjoys a weekend and has lost his passion for his favorite novels. His soul-crushing corporate job leaves him physically exhausted, making him yearn for the peace of his beautiful hometown. One night, he returns home as usual. He collapses onto his bed, drifting off while dreaming of his childhood home. But when he opens his eyes, the world has completely changed. He finds himself in a strange place, trapped in the body of a child, staring out at a landscape he doesn't recognize. Suddenly, a maid calls him Van-sama, frantically warning him that he's in a dangerous position. Disoriented, he asks the maid who she is, leaving her utterly stunned by his question. He gazes at the garden outside, deeply moved by its breathtaking beauty. The maid is shocked. Van is only 2 years old, yet he speaks with the perfect articulation and vocabulary of a grown man. He realizes the absurdity of the situation. He was a 30-year-old corporate slave just moments ago. This is clearly a reincarnation, and he begins searching for the original Van's memories to find his bearings. He correctly identifies the maid and confirms his own identity. His father is Jalpa Fercio, and he has 2 older brothers named Murai and Sesto. It seems he has been transported to another world without any typical explanation. Later, the family gathers in the grand dining hall for breakfast. The maids wait on Van hand and foot, treating him like a high-end VIP. During the meal, his father, Jalpa, begins his daily routine of questioning his sons about their progress. He turns to his second son, Yard, to see what he learned today. Yard boasts about his lessons in fire magic and complex battle formations. Next is the third son, Sesto, who proudly reports on his magic training. Usually, Van is exempt from such trivial questions, but today is different. Jalpa questions the boy's plans for the day. Van remains perfectly composed, stating his desire to master the nation's history and culture. His eloquence is completely unpredictable. Everyone in the room is left utterly speechless. Jalpa bursts into laughter, realizing how much he underestimated the child. He assumed the boy was merely a spoiled brat, but at only 2 years old, Van's intellect is staggering. He eagerly anticipates the coming-of-age ceremony when Van turns 8, where his true magical aptitude will finally be revealed. In a world governed by mana, discovering one's innate magical affinity is a life-defining moment. The 4 core elements, fire, wind, water, and earth, serve as the ultimate shield for the realm. Jalpa and his other sons are already masters of all 4. The noble Fergier family prides itself on overwhelming military might, particularly their mastery of fire magic. This world spans 3 continents, where spears, swords, and bows dominate the battlefield. They reside in the Skugaria Kingdom, a powerhouse in the southern Grand Continent. With a 300-year legacy, the royal family has steadily expanded their borders, led by a king who commands his nobles to crush smaller nations. Jalpa has even ascended from count to duke through these conquests. Back in his study, Van questions his maid, Till, about the kingdom's naval routes. She warns him that the deep seas are infested with monstrous leviathans, making even the narrowest straits a death trap. Van's eyes sparkle at the mention of legendary monsters, his mind racing with the thrill of exploration. Till explains that while elves, dwarves, and beastmen exist, they remain hidden within their own secluded cultures. Other maids interrupt, teasing Till for her complex explanations, and ask if Van needs a nap. Instead, Van thanks them, explaining his thirst for knowledge and even checking if they are the ones who need a break. The maids are instantly charmed by his maturity. The conversation then shifts toward the intricacies of magical equipment. He learns of mana stones and crystals capable of storing energy to power specialized tools. Suddenly, a towering butler named Esparta, reminiscent of Sebastian from Black Butler, appears. He arrives to observe the young prodigy, knowing Van has already begun mastering basic literacy and mathematics. He watches closely to see exactly how much the boy has truly retained. Esparta has served the Duke for years, yet Van hasn't uttered a single word to him until this moment. Van humbly claims he can barely write and only knows basic math. However, when Esparta tests him with complex arithmetic, Van answers every single question with perfect precision. Van desperately wants to escape Esparta's intense gaze, but there's no running away, as a hellish new challenge awaits him. He decides to personally tutor Van twice every week. Under Esparta's ruthless guidance, Van's life becomes a literal living hell. He is bombarded with advanced material that no 2-year-old should ever have to face. Despite the brutal regime, Van masters reading and writing, absorbing endless knowledge over the next 2 years. One afternoon, he finds himself honing his skills in the art of swordsmanship. He spars with Till using wooden sticks, clashing until she dodges his strike and smugly claims victory. This sets Van off, and he immediately begins chasing her down. The maids eventually catch Till and jokingly ask Van to deliver her punishment. He simply flicks her forehead. As time passes, Van masters new techniques, and by age 5, he is dueling commoner apprentices known as the Young Warriors. His passion stems from his past life's judo training, which ignited his love for combat. In this world, victory goes to whoever lands the first strike, and while sparring with a random boy, Van utilizes his previous knowledge to maintain perfect balance and strike the moment his opponent hesitates. His opponent is a 10-year-old with a massive reach, making his swings feel dangerously distant. However, the boy's attacks are predictable and lack any real finesse. Exploiting this lack of experience, Van counters with a decisive blow. This effortless victory further solidifies his reputation as a swordplay prodigy. Onlookers note that the elite brothers, Yard and Sesto, refuse to associate with commoners, and as fire magic specialists, they have zero interest in the blade. Suddenly, the deputy chief arrives. He is one of the most powerful warriors residing within the Duke's estate. He inspects Van's hands with concern, searching for signs of wear or calloused skin. He is baffled that despite Van's relentless nightly practice, his skin remains perfectly smooth. Word has spread that Asparta intends to triple Van's study load, a revelation that leaves Van absolutely stunned. He is the only one grinding from dawn until dusk. Despite the crushing academic pressure, Van's eyes sparkle when the topic shifts to his true passion. The commander vows to take Van under his wing, swearing to transform him into the world's greatest swordsman. He notes D's intensity and mentions his love for both swords and scholarship. D is visibly disappointed, wanting nothing to do with such distractions. Regardless, the regime begins, and D takes charge of Van's direct training. Van isn't exactly thrilled with D's tutoring, hoping for a much kinder instructor. D acknowledges that he shouldn't be too hard on a child, but that's a complete fabrication. The training is pure hell, forcing Van to maintain constant swings even while sprinting. He refuses to give the boy even a moment of reprieve. Instead, he commands him to hold a squat position during his supposed rest period. This infuriates Van, who begins to see D as something far worse than a mere devil. He's left suffering in a torturous floating chair pose. Till arrives to offer encouragement, praising Van's daily dedication and growth. Van wipes away the sweat, realizing that despite the hardship, he's actually enjoying this life. He lacked fulfillment in his previous existence, but this reincarnated life as a noble is different. We jump 3 years ahead, where his father stands before him with a sword, declaring that the humiliation of failure is unacceptable. He claims it's better to end his life than let him disgrace the family. Just like that, his beautiful second life seems destined for a tragic end. Now 6 years old, Van requests to finally visit the outside market. As he traverses the palace, the staff gaze in awe at the young prodigy. Even Till is amazed by his genius, certain he'll surpass his brother and lead the family one day. However, Van wants no part of the political games where the weak are crushed and the family head takes everything. His relationship with his brothers is strained, making a peaceful life seem nearly impossible. That's why he decides to take control of his fate, starting with a simple trip to the shops. While navigating the busy market, they arrive at their destination. They stand before the Marie Company, which Till explains is a massive corporation with branches spanning the entire kingdom. As they converse, their attention is drawn to a shouting old man. The man is dressed in nothing but filthy, ragged clothes. He screams at Van, telling him that this isn't some playground for children. The guards move to unsheathe their blades, but Van stops them, his eyes fixed on a young boy bound by thick rope. The man bellows that he can do whatever he wants with his own flesh and blood, claiming he's selling the boy to pay off a debt. Till quickly briefs Van on the kingdom's slavery laws, explaining that debt and crime are the two main paths to servitude. Van finally realizes why the child is so silent. In this world, such cruelty is a common, everyday occurrence. Suddenly, a woman named Rosalie approaches the group. She recognizes Van, and he decides to follow her lead. Welcoming them to the Marie Company, she promises to provide exactly what he's searching for. Van immediately inquires about the price of the boy the old man is trying to sell. After assessing the boy's magic aptitude, Rosalie coldly values the child at a mere 3 large silver coins. Enraged, the old man demands more, but Rosalie shuts him down, explaining that small children are high maintenance and low value. Just as the man prepares to leave in a huff, Van declares his intention to buy the boy himself. He asks Till for the funds, but she only carries high-value gold coins. Rosalie intervenes and completes the purchase, suggesting they settle the payment inside the building. Van reaches out a comforting hand toward the child. After introducing himself, he learns the boy's name is Kamshin, looking every bit the prince saving a damsel in distress. He grasps Van's hand, offering words of reassurance. He declares that Van is finally free to go wherever his heart desires. However, Kamshin's father poses a threat, and the boy's ignorance of the world makes him a liability. He offers to take him home, promising there's meaningful work he can do to help. A guard interrupts, stating Van can't bring an unknown child inside unless he's registered as a slave. He asks if the boy accepts this condition, and Kamshin nods in agreement. Taking his hand, they head to the market together to find him a fresh change of clothes. Rosalie halts them, insisting that a formal contract must be established first. She joins their hands and initiates the ritual, causing a magical crest to manifest on Kamshin's skin. Since Rosalie is a contract magician and this is Van's first time, she waives the fee as they continue their shopping trip. They browse the selection, looking for the perfect attire for Kamshin. Rosalie suggests standard slave rags, but Van refuses, choosing a high-quality outfit instead. Days later, Kamshin appears completely transformed in his new sophisticated attire. He finds Van and warns him that Dee is searching for him, earning a cookie for promising to keep Van's location a secret. Noticing the slave mark on his hand, Van asks why he isn't wearing gloves to hide the mark of shame. Kamshin admits he doesn't mind the mark since it represents his bond with Van. Despite his feelings, he puts the gloves on just as Dee's shouting echoes through the halls. Kamshin steps out and boldly lies to Dee, claiming Van is nowhere to be found. However, he still has cookie crumbs on his face, which he quickly wipes away when Dee points them out. Dee sees through the ruse, realizing that defying his orders took a surprising amount of courage. Recognizing Kamshin's resolve, he drags him away to replace Van in training. From the terrace, Van lazily observes the session. The former prodigy has seemingly regressed into an ordinary child. Since Van has abandoned his training, a replacement is necessary. Now 8 years old, Van faces his magic appraisal ceremony, while the commoners whisper that this extraordinary boy should be their future lord. The elite Fergio family usually boasts compatibility with 2 major elements, and there is no doubt that Van is expected to follow suit. Inside the Grand Hall, Van finds himself surrounded by the intimidating figures of the Fergio clan. The truth is finally revealed. Van possesses no elemental compatibility at all, wielding only the rare creation magic. His brothers sneer in mockery, while his eldest brother stands in shock. Their father is visibly disgusted, as creation magic is viewed as a curse rather than a gift. Often dismissed as mere alchemy, this magic creates items through visualization, but it drains massive mana just to produce a single sword. In most cases, users are relegated to making simple trinkets by siphoning mana from those with actual elemental talent. True nobility demands the 4 elements, with the Fergio family prizing powerful fire and healing magic above all else. The eldest son, Mercia, inherited wind magic from his grandmother. Despite being the hard-working head representative, his fire-wielding brothers still look down on him. Realizing Van lacks elemental power, Jalpa is enraged that his late wife, Mira, left him such a worthless heir. Mira had perished during childbirth, her body unable to withstand the raw intensity of her own fire magic. Jalpa draws his blade, fuming that Van's early potential was a lie. To him, creation magic is a stain on the family name, and if Van were to simply vanish from this world, then no one would ever have to know about this pathetic failure. Just as he prepares to deliver a fatal strike, Mercia steps in front of Van, shielding his younger brother from their father's wrath. He mentions a remote, undeveloped region within the Duke's vast territory that currently sits empty. It is a desolate village isolated in the furthest reaches of the land. He proposes a solution. Why not exile Van there to serve as its feudal lord? The Duke considers the idea. It's a borderland he recently acquired, a place where Count Ferdinand sends knights to be judged. Since the land is still loyal to the family, they decide to dump the failure there as its new ruler. The Duke officially appoints Van as the feudal lord of a remote village. He is ordered to depart as soon as preparations are complete, and once the others leave, Mercia drops to his knees. He bows before Van, offering a sincere and heavy apology for everything that has happened. He laments how Van was mistreated by their family and regrets his own role in Van's exile. But Van bears no grudge, knowing that without Mercia's intervention, he likely would have been sold into slavery. Despite his dire circumstances, Van vows not to waste this one chance at a new life. Mercia is left stunned by the sheer maturity and brilliance his younger brother possesses. He realizes that Van views the world with a depth and sensitivity that far surpasses his own. Mercia reaches out with a smile, promising to do everything in his power to support Van from afar. Van firmly grasps his hand, offering his heartfelt thanks to his big brother. Back at the estate, Till begins frantically packing their belongings for the long journey ahead. She breaks down in tears over the news, declaring that Van is a noble soul regardless of his magic. Van comforts her, revealing that he is actually thrilled to be heading to the village. As a feudal lord, he will finally be free from the suffocating shackles of the Duke's household. He plans to transform this new territory into a personal paradise where he can live in total comfort. Meanwhile, a group of adventurers scoffs, claiming that nobles are no different from the commoners they despise. They argue that these elites only care about their own hides rather than the king or the kingdom. To them, the highborn are nothing more than arrogant snobs who look down on everyone else. When asked why he accepted the mission to guard Van, the leader, Ortho, admits he couldn't refuse a direct request from the Fertia family. Van soon arrives on the scene to introduce himself to the hardened warriors who will serve as his escort. Jack views Ordo as a legendary veteran, noting his exceptionally powerful weapon. His charisma is infectious, allowing him to bond effortlessly with the group. Following the introductions, he takes charge of loading the supplies onto the carriages. Mercia assigned 10 adventurers for the escort, but several others have their own plans. Till declares she is joining the journey, insisting she is Van's exclusive servant. Dee arrives with his gear in tow, ready to impale anyone who dares cross Van's path. Questions arise about a knight serving as a personal escort, but Dee doesn't give a damn. The intimidating Esparza arrives, claiming that at 50 he's ready to retire to the countryside. He boards the carriage, intending to oversee Van's education while enjoying his retirement. It's clear they've brought an immense haul of supplies for the trek. Inside the carriage, Van feels overwhelmed with gratitude, prompting Till to ask why he's smiling. He expresses his thanks, truly happy that everyone chose to stay by his side. Till mentions the other maids wanted to come too, as the rest of the household treats them like dirt. Van is different. He treats them with actual dignity. He even goes out of his way to help them with the cleaning. Even the instructors who taught him swordsmanship have grown to admire him. He turns to Kamshin, reminding him that he could have stayed since his contract can be voided. Kamshin vows that he has already dedicated his entire life to serving Lord Van. Hearing such intense displays of loyalty leaves Van feeling completely embarrassed. The carriage lacks the family crest, a grim sign that his father wants him erased from existence. As they reach the mansion gates, the guard's daughter rushes over, desperate to know why he's leaving. His followers arrive with a massive carriage, hoisting a banner that announces Van Sama's departure. Following Dee's instructions, they provide a proper send-off, ignoring any orders to remain quiet. Suddenly, the sleeping eagle jolts awake, shrieking that the fourth prince has arrived as the carriage rolls out. Crowds of civilians swarm the path, shouting questions and pleading for answers about his sudden exit. Witnessing their heartfelt reactions, Van is stunned to realize just how much the people actually adore him. Turning around, he finds Till overwhelmed with emotion, her tears flowing like a literal river. They set up camp at the dense forest, marking Van's first night in a world crawling with lethal monsters. Ben recruits a band of adventurers for protection, led by a seasoned veteran named Ortho. Despite Van being only 8 years old, the experienced leader speaks to him with absolute respect and professionalism. Van offers a cheerful smile and gratitude, while Ortho observes the young boy with a calculating gaze. Till remarks that even hardened adventurers can recognize Van Sama's innate kindness. After trekking through multiple towns and harsh terrain, they endure several nights under the stars. Their pace remains sluggish, weighed down by the massive amount of supplies they're hauling. Covering nearly 100 kilometers a day, they push through a grueling 1,000-kilometer journey over 2 weeks. While studying the map, Till informs Van they're nearing a village, and he prepares to make a grand first impression. Suddenly, the driver slams on the brakes as the village comes into view, his face pale with worry. He frantically alerts the group that the settlement is currently under a brutal assault. They quickly pull over at a safe distance, scrambling to devise a tactical plan for their next move. It's a race against time, as the village is being pillaged by ruthless bandits or mercenaries. He surveys the village, which is heavily fortified by massive, reinforced wooden walls. Armored guards hold the gate while a squad of mages waits in reserve against 50 unknown hostiles. They believe that by striking together, they can successfully crush the opposition. However, he refuses the plan, fearing the inevitable bloodshed and high casualty count. Stubbornly, he insists on risking everything to defend his very first territory, refusing to back down. Ortho counters, acknowledging Dee's skill as a knight but demanding they focus on escorting Van instead. Sparta interjects, claiming that Dee is more than willing to lay down his life for the cause. Facing 30 foes alone is suicide. If Dee falls, the village loses its only true leader. Despite his age, Sparta remains a formidable master of the 4 elements. He devises a strategy involving barriers and bait, while Van escapes in a reinforced, magic-resistant carriage. They must hold the line behind the barrier, or Dee and his men are as good as dead. Van rejects the idea of leaving Sparta behind to face the enemy alone. Instead, he makes a daring choice to act as the bait himself. This reckless proposal is met with immediate and fierce opposition from the group. They argue that the enemy forces are far too dangerous for such a gamble. Another ally vows to stay behind and hold the line against the encroaching forces. But Van shuts them down, reminding everyone that he is the one in command here. He orders the escort to prioritize safety, refusing to let the veteran Sparta die in this godforsaken place. These are his father's royal knights, and he refuses to return home bearing news of their demise. Looking at Till, his surrogate sister, He vows that she will not be another casualty of this war. Van admires Christian's honesty, but he refuses to let the man throw his life away for him. He considers those who follow an incompetent lord like himself to be incredible souls, and he vows to lead from the front lines rather than barking orders from safety. He sketches out the tactical map. He will spearhead a frontal assault while the others crush the enemy from the flanks. If the enemy holds their ground, Van is prepared to fall. As long as his identity remains a secret, the duchy will be spared from the fallout as Ortho and the adventurers move in. He jokes that if they fail, he'll have to scold the entire party from the afterlife. The adventurer Poriel admits she's been burned by silver-tongued, useless nobles in the past. But after witnessing Van's resolve, every adventurer present is now willing to stake their lives on his command. The honorable knights pledge their swords to Van, the future of the fertile family, as Dee swears to protect him and the future he represents. Espada moves out, reminding Van that once this expulsion is complete, he must uphold the heavy responsibilities of his noble blood. He guarantees victory within 3 days as the group prepares to execute the plan of terraforming the battlefield. The opening move involves creating a massive barrier to facilitate long-range strikes. His own unit will strike from the left while Ortho's team hammers the enemy from the right. Those not in the initial wave must remain on high alert, ready to provide emergency support at a moment's notice. With a roar of enthusiasm, the entire force charges into the fray. The sheer scale of the barrier leaves the adventurers in absolute awe of his power. They realize their butler is actually a master of all 4 elements, far transcending his humble title. Deeply inspired, they refuse to let a noble as unique as Van meet an early grave. They now wish for Van to become their true lord, as their cynical view of nobility has been shattered over the last 2 weeks. Even so, they realize there are still many mysteries to uncover about the enigmatic Van. Overwhelmed with emotion, Till and Kamzian embrace him as tears of relief stream down their cheeks. Van refuses to let his team act as simple bait. He views them as family and meticulously prepares for the coming slaughter. He orders them to ready all medical supplies and treatments from the cart. Should the situation turn dire, they are prepared to storm the battlefield. The village raid reaches its climax as the settlements crumble, leaving the overconfident bandits celebrating their supposed victory. Their celebration is cut short as Van's guards launch a chaotic surprise assault. They find themselves positioned before a wall with a single narrow opening. Van and Ortho spearhead the assault, flanking from both the left and right. However, a heavily armored bandit slips past them, charging straight for the wall. Ortho spots the threat and shouts a warning to those behind the wall who are blind to the approaching danger. Muriel, the party's mage, hides behind the structure while charging a devastating magical strike. But the hulking armored bandit reaches her position with terrifying speed. He raises his weapon, ready to crush everything in his path. Van and Campion immediately rush forward to intercept the brute. Van orders the younger ones to stay back, knowing this foe is far too dangerous for children. Despite the warning, they engage the bandit with calculated precision. After a grueling struggle, Van's party wipes out the majority of the bandits, though a few manage to flee. While binding the captives, Ortho addresses the group. He considers staying behind to secure the area for a while. However, the party is already eager to move on to their next quest. Ortho remains behind for one reason: to keep a close eye on Van. The boy possesses a sharp and unnatural intuition, far beyond his noble upbringing. While he looks like a typical highborn child, that facade shatters the moment he speaks. He is polite and gentle, yet radiates a cheerful energy, completely lacking the usual noble arrogance toward commoners. Ortho's companions agree, viewing Van as a total enigma. His movements aren't those of a child, but of a seasoned knight forged in battle. To them, he is a mysterious prodigy who far outshines any noble they've ever met. If this boy is to become their lord, Ortho is desperate to see what kind of domain he will build. Ortho then asks his people if they are willing to lend their strength to the young master. They readily accept the call, though they can't help but worry about Van's habit of charging into danger alone. Regardless, they are fueled by a burning desire to grow even stronger. Suddenly, Coriel interrupts, teasing Van for being a mere kid who makes girls cry. Baydam, however, intends to be sincere, revealing she is actually an elf, possessing eternal youth despite her true age. She mentions that Tilt raised Van from infancy, so he's still a baby in her eyes. Meanwhile, Periel begins questioning how he learned such elite swordsmanship. Van credits his skills to Dee, claiming he was trained directly by him even before his physical development. It's clear his vast knowledge stems from Esparta, while his unwavering mindset was forged by Till. Overwhelmed with gratitude, Periel drops to one knee before the boy who saved her life. She vows to never forget the debt she owes for this incredible gift of life. Van simply offers a charming smile, telling her to put the matter out of her mind. Periel is left in awe, realizing a young noble has truly won the heart of a hardened adventurer. Esparta then informs Van that the villagers are beginning to gather for his arrival. Realizing that first impressions are everything, they prepare to make their grand entrance into the village. Van steps forward, introducing himself as the new lord who will manage and protect this territory. A man named Rhonda approaches, introducing himself and offering sincere thanks to Van for his heroic help. Van is well aware of the rumors. This village's residents and soldiers answer to no one from the outside. He boldly declares himself the new ruler, taking full command of the territory effective immediately. Rhonda leads them away to deliver a grim report. Bandit raids have decimated the population, leaving only 100 survivors out of 150. The village is a prime target because the neighboring kingdom of Jaranetta has shifted leadership. Under Lord Ferdinand, knights patrolled the border, but the new lord has left the frontier abandoned. In short, the village is now under constant threat because it falls under the jurisdiction of Lord Fercio. Van apologizes, explaining that while his father appointed rulers for the major cities, small villages like this were left to rot. Rhonda remains cynical, believing the village isn't worth protecting since it pays no taxes. Van commands Rhonda to stop lamenting the village's current state. Suddenly, Rhonda's son, Maladu, steps forward. Van observes his powerful physique and the intense fire burning in his eyes. He demands to speak on behalf of the entire village. Van admits the nobility, and perhaps even the founding King Berlinef, are responsible for these systemic flaws. His blunt honesty leaves the room in a stunned silence. However, he reminds them that complaining about ancient laws won't change their reality. He then lays out 3 primary objectives for the village. They must become too valuable for the kingdom to ignore by generating wealth, hiring elite mercenaries, and rebuilding the village with their own hands. Rhonda's daughter counters, claiming they've considered these paths, but the execution is nearly impossible. Selling raw materials like wood or stone is a loss due to massive transportation costs, and the villagers lack the education to produce high-quality goods. Van passionately retorts that they now have a leader who is both educated and fiercely protective. He vows to do whatever it takes to develop and defend this land. Rhonda and the others remain skeptical, but the silence is broken when Esparta steps forward, introducing himself as the butler of the prestigious Furkia family. He reveals that Van is a literal prodigy, appointed as lord at just 8 years old. Even the deputy knight commander of the Furkia family has come here to serve this young genius. The villagers are hesitant, but hearing this fills them with a sudden wave of gratitude. They're shocked that a high-ranking noble would ever bother with their forgotten village. Leylevet excitedly asks Van if his noble status means he possesses the power of a top-tier 4-element magic user. Van bluntly declines, revealing he only possesses creation magic. This revelation leaves Rhonda and the others in a gloomy state of despair. Despite this, he vows to fortify the walls to keep all enemies at bay. The current wooden fences are frail and incredibly vulnerable to fire. He explains that while pure earth magic fades, using massive boulders reinforced with stones will create a permanent defense. He proposes digging a massive moat and takes personal charge of the excavation. He insists they must also set lethal traps and prepare to launch counterattacks from atop the walls. They'll need bows, arrows, and stones, tools the villagers can easily master. He calls for a village assembly to introduce himself and unveil his grand vision. As the crowd gathers, Van delivers a powerful speech, claiming that with strong allies, this village will become a prosperous utopia. While he sounds like a silver-tongued politician, Van is the real deal, ready to address every concern. A resident steps forward to protest the crushing 30% tax on monster loot, but Van immediately abolishes it. He slashes the tax to a mere 10%, offering even more leniency for those currently struggling. He prioritizes their survival, knowing that extreme poverty forces parents to sell their own children. Another villager asks if they'll have any real protection against bandit raids. Van explains the grim reality. It would take 6 weeks for royal knights to arrive, and even then, they might never show up. The kingdom is broke and lacks the manpower to defend such a vast, remote territory. Hiring mercenaries is out of the question, as the costs for gear and supplies are astronomical. To demonstrate his party's strength, Van commands Espada to construct a massive earth wall within the perimeter. The sudden display of power leaves the onlookers completely awestruck. However, Van knows that true prosperity requires the cooperation of every single villager. If they are to survive here, the village must become a united front. As night falls, Van and his crew settle into their wagons, relying on camping gear since there are no local lodgings. An elder offers up his own home, but the kind-hearted Van refuses to kick an old man out of his own house. He has never felt discouraged by possessing creation magic, and he refuses to look down on his gift. He knows his unique power can rival anything the 4 primary elements can achieve. Despite his best efforts to appeal to them, the skeptical villagers force Van to work even harder to earn their trust. He vows to protect the village with his magic and transform it into a thriving paradise for everyone. Later, He and Rondo brainstorm ways to reinforce the fence, realizing that magical projectiles are far less effective behind short walls. Dan suggests building a catapult, though he notes it is typically a siege weapon rather than a defensive tool. While catapults are slow and difficult to aim, their ability to demolish fortress walls and observation towers is unmatched. Van pivots to a new strategy, launching oil-soaked rocks and torches to turn the entrance into a devastating fiery trap. The group is stunned, asking if Van was truly the one who engineered such a complex mechanism. Van casually confirms he did, leaving the entire group in a state of stunned silence. Even Van is still uncovering the depths of his power, having mastered the art of reshaping stone, metal, and liquid. Now is the perfect moment to showcase exactly what he has learned. With the bandits finally driven away, Van and his team venture into the mountains for a brief excursion. They begin hunting the surrounding monsters, turning the local beasts into a lucrative source of income. Sensing monsters ahead, he moves to intercept, leaving the others to harvest nearby trees. Kamshin gathers timber for Van, who prepares to unleash his unique creation magic. To succeed, he must visualize every facet of the object with absolute clarity. The more precise the mental image, the more flawless the result. By focusing on the smallest details, he can manifest anything he desires. He feels the magical energy surge from his core straight to his fingertips. He visualizes the raw wood fibers, manipulating them at a molecular level. He weaves them together, reinforcing the structure to create a dense wooden block. These blocks are composed of wood, yet they possess a sleek synthetic finish. They are vastly superior to natural timber, serving as the ultimate foundation for construction. The rest of the group returns soon after, dragging a massive monster carcass. They're stunned by the strange blocks, and as Ortho lifts one, he's shocked by its density. Curious about its durability, Van asks Ortho to put the block's strength to the test. Ortho strikes the material with every ounce of his power, but the heavy blow fails to leave even a single scratch on the surface. Armed with these high-grade materials, the group begins their journey back in the carriage. Van continues to forge various items, seemingly unbothered by the strain of his magic. Remarkably, his mana reserves show no signs of hitting zero. While creation magic usually drains a mage instantly, Van doesn't feel the slightest bit of fatigue. When asked how it works, he explains the visualization process before manifesting a razor-sharp katana. He also crafts a reinforced axe for her tail that prioritizes raw power over aesthetics, complete with a danger sign. She doesn't seem offended at all. In fact, she is more than ready to accept this lethal gift. While his magical energy is vast, his true growth lies in his rapidly improving weaponsmithing skills. He even conceals a small blade on his person, perfect for catching an opponent off guard. Meanwhile, Espada constructs a massive, impenetrable wall to protect the village, leaving Ortho and the others in total shock. Ortho calls Van a genius, but notes that Espada is a madman for finishing such a monumental task in mere hours. He feels honored to be ranked alongside Espada, appreciating how much he has supported the Fergio family from the shadows. Though he was once ready to retire, he finds new purpose in following Van, who suggests a spar to celebrate their future. However, Espada suddenly looms behind him, declaring that it is time for Van to study a mountain of books to earn his title. Terrified by the massive stack of textbooks, Van panics and shouts that reinforcing the village walls is a much higher priority. Espada questions his plan, skeptically asking if he simply intends to pile up more stones. Trusting in his own unique abilities, Van decides to push his creation magic to the absolute limit. He approaches the wooden entrance, sensing that he can fundamentally alter its structure. He applies the same logic he used in the forest to condense the wood into hyperdense blocks. His main focus is drastically increasing the weight and density of the material. This transformation is essential to ensure no enemy can ever hope to breach their defenses. Using his magic, he reforges the gate into a legendary barrier emblazoned with the proud Fergio family crest. To test its new strength, he commands Ortho to strike the gate with every ounce of his power. Ortho unleashes a devastating blow, but the impact results in nothing more than a tiny blemish. Van, however, is worried that even a single scratch means the wood he used isn't strong enough. The others are left baffled by how easily the wood is destroyed. The next morning, Van wakes up and realizes he is in a tight spot. His current living space is barely large enough for his body, and he can't even bathe before changing. They've been stuck in cramped camps and carriages since the day they arrived. He heads outside where Till and Kamshin are waiting to greet him. They look even more exhausted than he feels, and he knows this lifestyle cannot continue. Before he can even think about strengthening their defenses, he needs to prepare proper housing. He needs a place that is secure and sheltered, so he decides to construct a house. He brings out the wooden blocks he created and gathers them in an open area with Kamshin's help. He asks Rhonda if he can build on this plaza, provided it isn't being used by anyone else. Rhonda agrees, noting it's the perfect spot for Van since it's the uninhabited heart of the village. Van envisions holding massive festivals here one day, But for now, he steps forward and places his hand on the earth. He plans to build a home for himself, Till, Kamshin, and Esparta, while Dee and the others will have their own separate quarters. He drives a thin wire deep into the ground, expanding its diameter until it transforms into massive pillars. After mapping out this basic structure, he manifests interior walls, bedrooms of all sizes, and windows complete with shutters. Finally, he forges a mansion that is massive for Van, but perhaps a bit snug for a giant like Esparta. It stands like a mini palace within the village, leaving Till and Kamshin absolutely speechless. Kamshin realizes that creation magic is far more suited for building a legacy than simple elemental magic. He agrees that such powerful magic is the ultimate tool for territory protection. Esparta intervenes, noting that while Van is a force of nature in war, his true talent lies in peace. He can effortlessly improve the lives of his people, and no one is better suited for leadership than him. Experience heartlight and tingling with happiness. He and his knights arrive and their jaws drop in seeing a huge mansion that was not there earlier. When they learned Van made it using his magic, they decide to bring on more wood to create more houses. Ortho and others also run to chop the wood in competition with Dee. Thus, it creates a ruckus there to bring wood. Ven turns around and sees villagers are also gathered because they have heard Ven can make houses. They all present their issue with their house and the suggestions for renovation rise. He agrees to make their house as they live in shabby and terrible conditions. He commands them to line up to create an order for housemaking. He has no choice but to help gladly his people with his creation magic. Waters hashtag #10nispada, and the villagers are busy creating barricades. Day and Ortho people are collecting the woods. Man is creating houses and villages. Ban has gotten used to using this power and can handle the buildings easily. But he prefers making furniture first, and doing for others reminds him of his previous life where he was a corporate slave. He listens to Dee, appreciating that he is amazed at how great Van's story of magical power is. It takes a lot of effort to create such a magnificent palace. Van explains the general order in which houses are built. Basically, 4 houses are grouped together with streets and alleys arranged in a grid pattern. Because if ordinary people are built uniformly, when they have a building stone, he will rebuild the houses for each family. Is also designed at bath next to mansion. Till and Puril are making preparations to take a bath first. Puril has used water magic to fill the basin, and lit an old-fashioned fire to heat the water. These girls also invite Van to a bath together with them. Is an adult, but Van is still a kid. Ben flushes and says Kamzion is 10 and he is 8 but is still considered a kid. Bang takes a bath later, but regrets imagining the girls with their exposed skins and water that YE did not go together with the girls in the heavenly bath. However, he comes out of the bath and is refreshed to sleep in his spacious room, but it upsets him. He has no furniture. Van crafts a bed from the hay he acquired from the villagers. He rests soundly, his heart finally at peace. In the morning, Till serves a delicious meal, and Van enjoys the luxury of a relaxing breakfast in his own home. Esparta joins them, sharing his concern that while protection is vital, the village lacks a steady income. He notes their only link to the outside world is through mercenaries, causing Van to pout in annoyance. It's hard to take Esparta's serious lecture at face value when he has a piece of omelet stuck in his beard. Van argues that since he can produce houses, furniture, and clothes with ease, they should focus entirely on strengthening the walls. Esparta counters with a devastating point. Without trade, they have no spices or ingredients for Van's beloved sweets. Horrified by the thought of a life without sugar, Van is instantly motivated to build a new industry and sell products. He suggests trading wooden blocks, but the idea is quickly shot down. Till suggests selling materials from hunted animals, but that's also rejected since Ortho claims ownership of everything he hunts, not the village. Esparta suggests crops as the best alternative, but the village's current condition makes farming a lost cause for now. The group finds themselves at a total dead end, feeling completely defeated. Meanwhile, we check in with Ortho's men. Kusura is out with Van, Kamshin, and Tilt. Proudly wielding a new leather-lined shield, Kusura boasts of its resilience. He demands Kamshin and Tilt test its strength using the weapons Van gifted them. They hesitate to strike, knowing full well the terrifying power of Van's custom gear. Kamshin finally steps forward, slashing at the shield with his wooden sword. To everyone's horror, the shield is sliced clean in half, just like Zoro cutting through cannonballs. Kusura cries out in disbelief, wondering how a mere wooden sword could shatter his reinforced oak shield. Van steps in to repair the shield, rejoining the pieces to make it even sturdier than before. Kusura is overjoyed to see his gear restored, just as Ortho passes by with a cold look. He intends to sell his entire haul to Van. He's gathered a collection of precious ores from the forest's edge and the base of the hills. The cache contains iron, copper, silver, and even a hint of gold. But the most significant find of all is the mana ore. Van is electrified, wondering how such a treasure remained unmined for so long. Ortho reasons that the location is likely too remote and inconvenient for most to ever discover. This isolation allowed these rare ores and medicinal herbs to go unnoticed for ages. Van realizes this is a legendary find that only top-tier adventurers could ever hope to secure. Unlike wood, iron ore resists magical penetration, so Van transmutes the impurities into sand until only a pure core remains. Cuser is hyped and immediately begs Van to forge him a brand new sword. He demands a lethal, double-edged blade. Van offers to arm every adventurer who brought him materials, fueling Cuser's greed for even more custom weapons. Van visualizes the iron's density, ensuring the blade is durable while maintaining a razor-sharp edge. He manifests the sword, finishing it with an intricately designed hilt. This incredible crafting speed isn't due to shortcuts, but a sign of Van's rapidly evolving power. He presents the finished masterpiece to Cuser, his very first official customer. Next, he produces another massive greatsword. It features a beautiful aesthetic, showcasing Van's natural artistic flair. Cuser's roar of excitement attracts a swarm of other adventurers, all clamoring for their own custom gear. The system evaluates the craftsmanship, confirming these swords would fetch a literal fortune on the market. Bart is stunned by the revelation. Rare ores are typically found in mountains, so their presence here suggests golems or a hidden dungeon. Ortho's team hasn't scouted deep into the forest yet, explaining why they haven't encountered these golems. Asparta tells Van that a dungeon would revolutionize their fortunes and trigger a massive trade boom. This is the ultimate catalyst for Van's economy, as a dungeon is a paradise of endless resources. Once reported, the guild will immediately open a branch to manage the artifacts and treasures found within. It's a prime opportunity for adventurers to gain fame and secure exclusive rights to explore the depths first. However, reporting it now is risky. The village isn't ready for the inevitable influx of outsiders. They would be swarmed by merchants and knights, putting an impossible strain on their food and resources. Neighboring countries are a constant threat, and the hostile furrier family is even more dangerous. If they learn about the dungeon, they will send their troops to occupy the land immediately. They suggest expanding the village first to build a defense that the furrier family cannot breach. Ortho plans to pinpoint the dungeon's location while gathering as many resources as possible. Van is determined to repay his friend's loyalty, knowing a dungeon is the ultimate prize for any noble. His family views him as a failure, and he knows his brother would try to steal the dungeon for himself. He vows to use his power to ensure no one ever takes this village away from him. With housing now stable, the focus shifts to securing their finances and strengthening their defenses. Since they lack a large labor force, Van mass produces weapons and shields to prepare for the coming traders. He uses his magic to reinforce the stone walls until they are as indestructible as concrete. Standing atop the newly fortified wall, he knows their true battle is just beginning. The defenses are now equipped with massive shields to repel any enemy counterattack. He positions towers along the perimeter and prepares to install ballistae before summoning Kamshin to his side. Kamshin stands speechless until Ren asks what's wrong, as the boy stares at his hands, stunned by how Van transformed the village so easily. Van simply states that as the Lord, managing the village is his duty, before asking Kamshin what he truly desires. It is a profound question to ask a 10-year-old boy. With burning passion, Kamshin declares that he wants to protect Van with his very life. Van is caught off guard by the intensity and tells him not to overdo it, moved by Kamshin's straightforward loyalty. He vows that next time he will craft custom armor for his loyal knight to keep him out of harm's way. The village's facade is completely transformed, and Van proudly asks if anyone has ever seen a stronghold this well protected. This is no longer a simple village. It is an impenetrable fortress that no bandit could ever hope to breach. Concerns are raised that if the Duke had known of Van's true potential, the family would have flourished with Van as its head. Esparta argues that the family head only values raw combat, but D defends Van, insisting his utility and battle prowess will soon surpass everyone. Esparta and D get locked in a heated argument as they both try to prove their points. Van intervenes, claiming it's useless to regret one's circumstances. What matters is adapting and mastering the fate you were dealt. Everyone is stunned to hear such wisdom from Van, and they find themselves deeply inspired by his words. The heavy atmosphere instantly shifts into one of cheer and optimism. Outside, massive ditches have been dug around the outer wall, though they have yet to be filled with water. They still need to reinforce the base of the moats and establish a proper irrigation system. Currently, they rely on rainwater in the river, but the village needs a truly reliable water source to survive. Suddenly, a scout rushes in screaming in a panic. The bandits have returned to launch another assault. He commands everyone to retreat behind the walls immediately and seal the gates. Van is impressed by how quickly the villagers respond, despite him only being in charge for a few days. Sensing their paralyzing terror, he delivers a stirring speech to bolster their morale. He reminds them that they are fighting for the very future of their village. Admitting he cannot protect this village alone, he makes a plea. He asks them to lend their strength to his cause. This surge of confidence inspires the men to follow Van's instructions to the letter. Some men rush to the watchtowers while others secure the gate. As Van moves forward, Till grabs his hand silently, her face flooded with emotion. He requests that Dee scout the enemy's position to uncover their true objective. Dee agrees instantly, telling Van to leave the scouting to him. Dee is fully convinced that Van is a brilliant leader and a tactical genius. He believes that with these honorable, well-trained soldiers, victory is certain even in the direst conditions. Swelling with pride, he advances, ready to sacrifice his life for Lord Van's sake. From his vantage point, he watches the terrified bandits sprinting desperately toward the village. He informs Van that roughly 50 to 100 bandits are closing in from 100 yards out. But he suspects that someone, or something, is pursuing the bandits. He hopes it might be a night patrol, but the reality is far worse. He spots armored dragons roaring and hunting the bandits, a nightmare scenario for a village with no elite warriors. Even veteran soldiers would face a suicide mission trying to take down armored dragons. Magic is the key, but only Esparta and Rana's daughter possess the power to wield it. Dragons have clear weak points, but no ordinary villager can survive the impact of their massive claws and tails. He barks out orders to load the ballistas with heavy iron bolts. He remains skeptical of the arrow's impact, yet he recalls his resolve to follow Van's lead. He commands the panicked soldiers and villagers to settle down and listen to Van's instructions. His strategy involves using the bandits as live bait for the 48-meter giants. Van pities the bandits, but Dee simply laughs, believing that humor is the only way to tackle a hopeless situation. Dee takes command of the men, ordering them to strike the dragons the moment the bandits dive into the moat. He tells them there's no need for fear. Hitting an eye or a mouth will create the opening they need. He rallies their spirits, shouting that they will win this battle regardless of the cost. And once they win, they'll celebrate with a dragon barbecue for dinner. The bandits are pushed to the edge, their energy completely spent. Several fall into the moat while others are ruthlessly picked off. They stagger across the dirt, struggling to move with zero stamina remaining. With the dragons finally in range of the ballistas, the villagers unleash a devastating volley. Dee tracks the trajectory of the arrows as they seem to vanish into the distance. The iron bolts shatter the dragon's paws, dropping the beasts instantly and leaving Dee absolutely stunned. Van is desperate to know the status of the battle, so Dee gives him a quick report. They've managed to take down 10 dragons in one shot, but they are officially out of iron arrows. Van suggests switching to wooden arrows, an absurd idea that only someone like him would propose. After analyzing the villagers, confidence surges as the guards on the watchtowers steady their aim, loading their ballistas with a mix of iron and wooden bolts before unleashing a volley. Surprisingly, even those wooden arrows prove lethal, packing enough raw power to pierce through the thick dragon hides. The relentless ballista fire rains down, completely decimating the dragon swarm. A roar of victory erupts, marking a monumental turning point. They achieve a flawless victory with 0 casualties, having spent only 60 arrows. Dee approaches Van, giving him the full credit he deserves for the defense. But as Van peers over the wall, he realizes these dragons look a bit different. They are actually prehistoric dinosaurs. Dee has no concept of what a dinosaur is and continues to praise Van, insisting the village would be ash without the ballistas, though Van finds the hero worship incredibly cringeworthy. Their attention then shifts to the 30 bandits currently groveling in the moat. They round up the survivors, who immediately begin desperately begging for mercy. They know that if they are handed over to the authorities, they face a grim future of slavery or life in a dungeon. They plead to work for the village instead, but their heinous crimes are not so easily forgotten. One villager steps forward to strike them, fueled by the rage of losing his parents to their cruelty. Van intervenes, telling him not to soil his hands with the blood of such pathetic people. The bandits will eventually face the full weight of the law, but until then, they will serve the village as forced labor. Soon the massive task of butchering the carcasses begins. The workers are careful to keep the valuable eyes, fangs, and bones intact while processing the mountain of remains. With 30 men wielding Van's custom-forged blades, they can process a maximum of 5 creatures per day. Van pushes them to work faster, determined to harvest the meat while it's still at peak freshness. The following day, Ortho, Dee's team, and the residents begin the massive task of butchering the dragon meat. Through their relentless hard work, the entire process is completed in just 3 days. The next night, a grand banquet is held for the villagers to celebrate their overwhelming victory. Thanks to Van's leadership, the people have grown strong and no longer have to worry about their finances. They fully indulge in the celebration, filling their bellies with fresh meat and plenty of drinks. Van takes a bite of the dragon flesh, his eyes sparkling from its mesmerizing and divine flavor. The meat is grilled to a perfect crispy crust, hiding a juicy and tender interior. He asks Ortho if every part of the dragon is this delicious. Ortho informs him that the inner meat is exceptionally fatty and flavorful because it's protected by the creature's hard shell. He shifts the topic, expressing his conviction that the ballistae are just as formidable as the personal weapons Van crafted for them. Every adventurer praises the weapons and their incredible features, but D overhears them. It breaks his heart, and he approaches Van with a menacing aura to demand his own gear. When D hears that Van charged Ortho and the others, he tries to persuade Van with a desperate sparkle in his eyes to waive the cost of these weapons. He argues his case as a loyal subordinate who manages materials and finances, requesting new outfits for his men, but Van quietly slips away. Rhonda and his family also savor the feast, cherishing the peaceful atmosphere where they can finally laugh and share a meal with a noble. Esparta passes by, noting that while speaking of aristocrats so casually is usually dangerous, it's simply part of Van's unique charm. He is certain that Van will continue to perform legendary feats for the village. Ortho informs Van about the market price of dragon meat, revealing that a merchant will buy a single-shelled dragon for roughly 20 gold coins. High-quality meat is rare, so even after transportation costs, they expect 8 gold coins per dragon. With over 30 carcasses, their total profit will exceed 300 coins. Van is stunned when he converts the gold to yen, realizing they've just earned the equivalent of 300 million. Esparta arrives to congratulate Van on his legendary defense against the mythical beasts. However, he reveals that any village earning over 100 coins must pay a 50% tax to the Marcus treasury, leaving Van shocked that aggressive taxation exists in this world too. Van tries to keep this a secret, but hiding a single dragon is one thing, but concealing a horde of 10 is impossible, and the village's true state would be exposed to the world. Espada advises him to reach out to his eldest brother for help. He suggests giving his brother the full credit for slaying the dragons. They plan to claim they simply stumbled upon mercenaries who had already eliminated the beasts. With his 3 older brothers fighting to become the head of the family, helping Marquis win would be a massive strategic advantage for them both. As he passes through the village, the locals swarm him, shouting their eternal gratitude. One villager even shouts that he should take Till as his wife. Ignoring the comments, a blushing Van takes her hand and leads her away. Despite his childish appearance, he carries himself with the maturity of a seasoned adult. After walking for a while, he releases her hand, contemplating the weight of their bond. He realizes that these deep connections are vital for their future. However, he knows that one day they will inevitably have to move on. He prepares to ask her if she has feelings for anyone else, but she cuts him off, declaring that her only desire is to devote herself to him. She reveals that she wants to stay by his side for the rest of her life. Later, Van heads to the watchtower to check in with the sentry. He asks if any merchants, specifically Mr. Bell, have been spotted on the horizon. The lookout possesses incredible vision, identifying the merchant's face from a massive distance. Sensing a potential trap, Van orders the bridge raised and the ballista prepped in case bandits are lurking in the carriage. The scene shifts to the group of weary merchants. They lament their broken wagon and ruined stock, fearing they won't see a single coin of profit in this territory. Confusion sets in as they finally approach their destination. They are stunned to see no cottages in sight, making them wonder if they took a wrong turn. They fear they have wandered off the path entirely. Suddenly, Van appears atop the wall, demanding they state their names, company, and the identities of their escorts. The merchants quickly realize they are speaking to the rumored 4th son of the noble family. They are utterly floored to discover the lord of this village is a mere 10-year-old boy. The brothers, Mr. Bell and Lango, introduce themselves alongside their elite guard, a silver spear-wielding adventurer. After the guards confirm they've shared drinks in the past, the tension finally breaks. Van then grants the merchants official permission to enter his domain. Stepping inside, the brothers are immediately speechless at the village's impressive interior. They meet with Van, admitting they were initially worried about the state of the settlement. When Van asks to see their dragon shells, their hearts skip a beat, as most adventurers are terrified to even face such beasts. Their eyes sparkle with excitement as Van leads them toward the main warehouse. The brothers' jaws hit the floor the moment they see the mountain of materials inside. Van casually explains he's harvested parts from 40 dragons and has the entire village working to process the haul. Bell asks for a month to organize a massive trade deal, but Van just invites them to go eat some delicious meat. Realizing the village has a massive surplus that might go to waste, Bell proposes selling the meat to neighboring towns. He knows those villages are struggling with high taxes and dwindling food supplies. Providing the meat for free is a noble gesture that will help everyone. Van decides to supply the meat at no cost, proving that profit isn't his only motivation. Bell quickly realizes that Van is every bit as sharp-witted as the rumors suggested. He offers Van a generous price for his goods, even though he initially expected no profit. Van expresses his gratitude and invites Bell to return, promising he won't regret the partnership. Van then leads them to inspect his stock, revealing weapons and armor with incredibly intricate designs. The brothers are completely blown away by the sheer craftsmanship. Van allows them to test the sword's sharpness on a tough dragon scale. The razor-sharp blade slices through the hardened skin like it's butter. Blown away by the quality, they agree to purchase the weapons at Van's listed price. With so many weapons available, they plan to return to buy the rest later. Van takes them on a tour of the village, proudly showing off his massive ballista. They are utterly fascinated by the village and everything it has to offer. During lunch, Belle suggests recruiting more merchants to double the frequency of their trade visits. Van wants to bring in gourmet food to liven up the village and promote his gear, but the brothers hesitate. It's clear they want to keep these legendary weapons for themselves as exclusive sellers. Van points out that if multiple traders use the same route, they'll need a way to advertise their goods. The brothers are intrigued and want to know exactly how they should proceed. Van then asks them to consider opening a dedicated shop right here in the village. He suggests negotiating with their trademaster to see if such an enterprise is possible. Van is ready to construct a house for the brothers, providing them with a stable income and a storefront of their own. This partnership eliminates the need for outside merchants, creating a win-win scenario. Belle accepts the offer, and they shake hands to launch their new business venture. Margot and the adventurers depart for the city to recruit labor and secure materials from the Chamber of Commerce. They plan to sway those merchants with master-crafted swords, dragon hide, and a magic core, while Van sends a detailed report of their progress to Mercia. Van begins constructing the shop for Belle, meticulously designing every detail. The first floor serves as the storefront, the second as living quarters, and the basement as a massive warehouse. Belle is absolutely floored by the gesture. With the shop inventory set to arrive in a week, Van heads toward the river with Kamshin and Till. The forest is thick, but Kamshin leads the way with the poise and bravery of a true gentleman. Van wants to support his people, but even he is starting to feel the physical toll of his efforts. After an hour of trekking, they reach a pristine river, the key to the village's new water supply. Without wasting a second, the construction of the waterway begins. Espada unleashes his monstrous strength, excavating 10 meters of earth in the blink of an eye. The rest of the team follows behind, clearing the path for the stream. Van trails them, using his magic to reinforce and stabilize the channel walls. He finds satisfaction in the grueling work, realizing that the power of teamwork is on an entirely different level. Just 8 hours later, the village is already in sight, a feat that should have taken an entire week. Van suggests they call it a day, but the crew insists on pushing through since the village is only hours away. Despite their exhaustion, the team refuses to slow down. Van is stunned by the stamina of the elders, proving that the older generation still harbors incredible power. By the next morning, they reach the village outskirts, where Espada shatters a final barrier to complete the channel. Fresh river water surges into the village, much to the delight of the local residents. This new system saves them immense time and effort, though they still require a filtration system to purify the supply. One of the villagers steps forward and provides him with the necessary materials. He watches closely, captivated by the intricate way Van crafts his inventions. Van designs a sophisticated filter using branches and cloth, positioned at the canal's end where water flows into a metal reservoir equipped with a tap. To power the boiler, Lou seeks out Belle to obtain a fire magic crystal. Just as the water begins rushing through the moat, Van raises concerns about potential flooding, and Esparta confirms that heavy rainfall could indeed pose a major threat. He explains that they must widen the channels and reinforce the embankments in areas where the water has no escape. Van proposes two solutions: either divert the overflow back to the river or construct a massive lake behind the settlement. Esparta thinks a lake is a brilliant idea, noting that a reservoir would be a priceless asset during a drought. They decide to excavate the lake 200 meters behind the village, and the work begins immediately. Only a few days later, the massive reservoir is finally complete. Van is initially overjoyed to see such an abundant supply of water at his disposal. However, his mood quickly shifts when he's dragged out of bed before the sun has even peeked over the horizon. After a hasty apology for the early wake-up call, he's told that Rhonda and the others are already waiting. Van and Esparta quickly make their way toward the newly finished landmark. The lake is officially named after him to honor his incredible merit and preserve his legacy for the future. Even the town is renamed Van Village, which leaves him feeling incredibly awkward about having his name plastered everywhere. He approaches from the rear of the village and finds a massive crowd of residents gathered around the water. He steps forward to investigate the commotion. He spots a mermaid-like creature lurking in the lake. Legends speak of mythical beings with radiant blue hair dwelling deep within the forest rivers. These half-human, half-fish hybrids are known as the Avgallu. While rare, the girl before them is undeniably an Avgallu. Van calls out to her, but she responds only with silence. Assuming she lacks speech, he instructs Kamshin to gather fresh fruit and food. In an effort to build rapport, he offers the feast. The Avgallu begins swimming cautiously toward Van. Ortho and the others stand ready to strike if she attacks, but she simply nears the food. Suddenly, she asks Van if the food is meant for her. Her sudden speech sends a chilling shock straight down his spine. Startled by her voice, he instinctively recoils. As he steps back, she approaches and takes a tentative bite. Her expression shifts instantly as she demands to know who prepared this. The group immediately points toward Van, giving him all the credit. Though he tries to remain modest and humble, he eventually admits that he was the one who secured the meat. Without a word, she dives back into the depths of the water, leaving everyone stunned by the bizarre encounter. The following morning, Tilcom comes rushing into Van's quarters. He shouts that there is an urgent message from the villagers regarding an incoming attack. The enemy has already seized the moat and refuses to budge until they see the Lord in person. Van rushes to the top of the wall and scans the horizon. He spots a group of Avgallu. While it was only a child yesterday, today the ranks are filled with adults of all ages. Their clan leader, sporting a terrifying expression, demands an audience with them. Van decides to bring his strongest men along, feeling intimidated by the leader's menacing aura. Bella is eager to join, her eyes sparkling as she mentions the rare treasures and business potential the Avgallu possess. Together, the group makes their way down to the water channel. The Avgallu leader begins by expressing his daughter's deep gratitude toward Van. He heard rumors of a boy slaying dragons and realizes the stories were true, noting the obvious strength of Van's guards. Suddenly, he reveals his true purpose, arranging a marriage between Leta Priora and Van. This catches Van completely off guard, leaving him baffled as to who Leta is and why marriage is on the table. The man introduces himself as Lata Vesta, claiming his daughter Leta is a beauty with a bright future. He points toward Priora, who is currently playing nearby with her friends. They belong to a rare race that has avoided humans until now. However, after dragons infested their river, many of their people were slaughtered. They seek a powerful husband for Leta to ensure their survival, and they've chosen Van to be her protector. Van counters, insisting that she should only marry someone she truly loves. He vows to protect her tribe with all his might, without the need for a forced marriage contract. Moved by his nobility, Vesta decides to settle his tribe in the river, treating Van as his own son-in-law regardless. Van forbids them from moving to the lake, fearing the bridges and merchants will frighten the newcomers. It takes a moment for the realization to hit Van. Vesta just referred to him as his son-in-law. As Vesta returns to the depths, Van desperately protests that he isn't his son-in-law, but his cries fall on deaf ears while Prior bids him a formal farewell. Esparta remarks that Van is incredibly fortunate to have secured a friendship with the Avgallu. However, even he didn't anticipate that Van's first wife would hail from the Avgallu tribe. With the lake now teeming with Avgallu, Van feels the weight of responsibility, realizing he now has an entire tribe to oversee. Accepting his fate, Van constructs 2 specialized buildings to serve as a sanctuary for them to relax. Before long, the villagers begin interacting with the Avgallu, exchanging grain and hearty meals. In return, the Avgallu start delivering precious ores back to the village. Van sets his sights on a massive project, a wall far more formidable than the last to fortify the lake and ensure Avgallu security. Esparta advises him to think bigger and design a true city to accommodate future growth. He warns that without a proper plan, the territory will remain far too restricted. Van questions Esparta on whether a variant designed for 2,000 people wouldn't be superior. Esparta politely disagrees, warning Van that such a massive undertaking requires far more time and careful consideration than he realizes. To house guilds and fortifications, each section of the wall must span at least 600 meters, a scale that shocks Van, who originally planned to build a mere 10-meter wall by himself. Esparta explains that the full construction will begin once they have more manpower, allowing them to build a foundation ready for future upgrades. Van shares his vision for a unique, non-square fortified city that breaks away from traditional designs. He begins sketching the complex structure on a piece of paper to illustrate his point. He highlights a triangular bastion designed so that even if the outer line falls, the enemy is barred from entering the city proper. Should the invaders bypass the triangle to attack the main city, they'll find themselves trapped in a lethal crossfire from the right, left, and front. The formation is impeccable. Even elite mages wouldn't stand a chance of shielding themselves against it. Suddenly, a messenger bursts into the room with urgent news. He reports that envoys from Count Ferdinand have just arrived. They carry the Ferdinand emblem, but there is another crest present as well. It's the unicorn shield of Count KN, a rising power, accompanied by 3 wagons and 100 soldiers. 2 women stand at the village entrance, deeply skeptical of the rumors surrounding the supposed child prodigy. They've arrived to personally verify if his reputation is earned or fabricated. Meanwhile, Van and his people prepare to receive these uninvited guests from the Earl's faction. 2 girls enter the room, one a mere child, the other a formidable woman with a presence like Esdeath from a Kamiga kill. Van introduces himself as the lord of the village, while the woman identifies herself as Panamera Carrera Kane. She is here to investigate the management and output of this territory. The young girl nervously introduces herself as Arette, daughter of Count Ferdinand, seeking Marcus Fertia on her father's orders. Van quickly deduces the situation. The youngest daughter is the diplomat, while Panamera acts as her elite escort. After the king reduced the earl's territory, the earl grew terrified that a genius like Van would launch a counteroffensive from the shadows. They are here to scout Van's status and force an agreement. But Panamera is left speechless by Van's sharp intuition. She is stunned that a 10-year-old child can read the political landscape so perfectly. His hypothesis is correct. Ferdinand was never able to predict the Marquis's true intentions. Van's name has sparked intense debate for 2 years, threatening to shatter the current understanding of magical potential as he builds his prosperity. Panamera still can't grasp why he was made lord without the 4 elements, despite the rumors of him being a prodigy. The earl is left wondering why Van was specifically granted lands that border the most volatile regions of the kingdom. Van admits the truth. He lacks elemental magic and was exiled here on a whim. He's baffled by the idea of his father pulling the strings. She notes that while this was supposedly a tiny village, it has evolved into a massive fortress in only 2 months. He even commands an elite butler and a high-ranking knight. Furthermore, his population has surged to at least 2,000 people. He utilizes technology that allows his army to move undetected, a bold move despite the risk of being spotted. This is a massive step toward militarizing the border, and the tension in the room is palpable. Panamera glares at him, demanding to know what his true intentions are. Yet Van remains completely clueless about her suspicions. He explains that his father only permitted him to take Camillo and his personal luggage. His family essentially cast him out in silence, forcing him into exile. When she questions those around him, his followers begin to offer their honest testimonies. One claims he was so captivated by Van's genius and talent that he chose to follow him. Espada explains that as an old man, he decided to retire and dedicate his legendary skills to Van's service. Till adds that Van's genuine care for his subordinates is why she serves him, and Van expresses deep gratitude for their loyalty in this remote wasteland. Still, Panamera demands to know exactly how he transformed this village so rapidly. She stands up, declaring that she needs to witness his work with her own eyes. Van heads outside, as he still needs to construct one final fortress wall. Upon exiting, he finds Fernand's soldiers lined up and waiting. He steps forward and commands his men to bring him the necessary materials. They head out of the village alongside the guards. However, he remains on edge, suspecting a hidden ambush awaits them. They arrive at the site where Van intends to construct a massive 2-meter gate. He marks the perimeter, deciding to refine the layout at a later time. Espada unleashes his magic to raise a crude wall, leaving the girl stunned by his elemental mastery. Van then activates his own skill, instantly manifesting a masterfully refined gate, intricately designed from wooden blocks in mere seconds. Stunned, Arid asks how he achieved this and what his secret magic skill is. Van admits that he unfortunately possesses production magic, a skill that high society deems completely worthless. While Van views himself as a failure, he remains unaware of how much his talent truly impresses those around him. He explains to Arid that his magic is limited to crafting items, making it a bottom-tier ability in the eyes of the nobility. Arid sympathizes, as her own father was distant and her mother completely ignored her. Burdened by a timid nature and a lack of academic talent, her only solace was her passion for puppetry. Though physically uncoordinated, she could manipulate dolls with supernatural precision, hoping this gift would finally earn her mother's love. Desperate for approval, she practiced her magic relentlessly, dreaming of a life spent dancing with her dolls. Yet her parents only saw her as a disappointment. Confused by their anger, she eventually learned that her magic was considered a disgrace among the elite. Abandoned by her mother and ignored by the world, she spent her days in silence, fading into the background. Arut once viewed herself as worthless, haunted by her mother's cruel words and the weight of her own internal agony. Despite her efforts, her magic remains shunned by society, leaving her feeling utterly powerless and drowning in tears. At the age of 10, her father summons her for a long-awaited meeting, where the formidable Panamera already awaits. Panamera questions the decision to send the girl, but the father shuts down the nonsense, insisting this move is vital for their future. Arut finds herself captivated by Panamera's presence, wondering who this mysterious and powerful woman truly is. Panamera cryptically notes that their eventual return hinges entirely on how well things proceed. Introducing herself as a noble, Panamera bluntly asks Arut if she's heard the news regarding her upcoming marriage. The revelation leaves Arut paralyzed with shock, a reaction that tells Panamera everything she needs to know. It is immediately clear that Arut has been kept completely in the dark regarding her own engagement. Panamera explains that the marriage depends on Van's talent. If he's unskilled, the deal is off, making Arut feel like a discarded tool. Panamera clarifies that this is simply the way of the world. Arut is the last of her siblings left to be married off. She reassures the girl that everything will be fine, provided her future husband proves to be a man of great worth. As Panamera reaches out with a firm yet gentle hand, Arut wonders if she's finally found someone who truly cares for her. During their 3-week journey, Arut experiences true happiness for the first time, finding comfort in Panamera's strict yet loving guidance. Their bond grows through simple gestures, like Panamera affectionately stroking Arut's head to spark a conversation. When Arut breaks down in tears, Panamera offers a comforting touch instead of anger, further winning the young girl's heart. She finds solace in Panamera's affectionate presence, feeling a warmth she's never known before. Panamera's playful personality and constant jokes keep Arut's spirits high throughout the long trek. As the village nears, Arut realizes she doesn't want a husband. She only wants to stay by Panamera's side. Determined to sabotage the union, she resolves to treat Van with cold indifference, even though his extraordinary nature is undeniable. This is a far cry from what she expected. Van speaks openly with Panamera despite just meeting her, surrounded by loyal subordinates who clearly adore him. Even though he is younger than her, his list of accomplishments is staggering. He possesses raw talent and an unbelievable array of skills. She's baffled by his success, but Van reveals a dark truth. His family abandoned him. They branded him useless and exiled him from the city. This revelation hits Arut hard. She realizes they both suffered the same rejection and wonders why their paths diverge so drastically. She watches him closely, witnessing the miracles he performs with a magic type that everyone else dismissed as worthless. Her petty jealousy instantly evaporates, replaced by a burning curiosity. High society only values the 4 main elements, leading her to abandon her own magic when her mother lost interest in her. Now she can't help but wonder what would have happened if she had never stopped training. Perhaps she could have stood on equal footing with someone as powerful as Van. She feels a sudden urge to reclaim her potential and give it another shot. Panamera notes that Van is transforming this village into a vital strategic stronghold. Van clarifies that his father, the Marquis, had no idea about his true potential when he cast him out. Panamera finds the Marquis's ignorance pathetic. Had he known the true power of production magic, he could have expanded his empire, but even she hadn't realized its godlike potential. Van announces they'll continue reinforcing the fortress walls tomorrow. Panamera eagerly agrees, desperate to witness the full extent of his building capabilities. As they walk, she's flooded with questions. Did he build every house and that perfect drawbridge alone? What mythical materials is he using and how durable are these structures? While she doesn't fully grasp the mechanics, Van senses that the tension between them has finally begun to thaw. Panamera shifts the topic to the arranged marriage between Van and Arut. Van realizes this political move was meant to bury the hatchet between their families. But Van is focused on fortification and growth. He makes it clear that a marriage of convenience isn't necessary to maintain the peace. He guarantees Panamera that the village will continue to thrive, piquing her interest even further. Panamera reveals that Arut is someone she has personally raised. When Sir Ferdinand proposed the marriage, she was initially dead set against it. She hated the idea of Arut being pawned off to the hostile Marquis family, especially to a child exiled to the brutal frontier. Panamera initially doubted the boy's skills and questioned his selection, fearing for Arut's happiness. She had prepared countless excuses to call off the engagement just to protect Arut from a forced marriage. Van realizes Arut's grim expression stems from the terrifying fear of being abandoned once again. He empathizes with her pain, having faced a similar darkness. But Panamera reveals her heart has changed. She declares that for Arut's sake, she now fully supports the union, praising Van's pure and noble character. He possesses the wisdom of an adult and fiercely protects his people, turning a tragic exile into a tale of triumph. Furthermore, he wields a level of magical prowess that defies all common logic. Panamera even admits that if they were the same age, she would have claimed him as her own husband. Van beams with pride at her high praise as Panamera continues to shower him with compliments. He is absolutely over the moon, struggling to maintain his composure and hide his sheer joy. Now the moment of truth arrives to see if Arut herself agrees to the arrangement. While Arut must make her own choice, Panamera insists she will never find a better partner than Van. Tearing up, Arut admits that while Van is a wonderful person, she still harbors deep uncertainty. Van reassures them that marriage at 10 is absurd, offering Arut a home in the village with no strings attached. He urges her to take her time, but Panamera points out the massive political advantages of such a match. With the village developing at breakneck speed, rumors of his success are bound to reach the ears of the powerful. His rare and formidable power will inevitably paint a target on his back, making strong allies a necessity. Panamera asks if Arute's support wouldn't be vital, noting the backing he'd received from the Marquis and Count Ferdinand. This union would even deter the Night Order from seizing his lands, though Van suspects a hidden catch. While the political benefits are clear, Van wonders if his father sent Arut here under a secret, calculated command. Under the current circumstances, there is absolutely nothing to be gained from handing over his daughter. He sees no reason for further contact, but Panamera insists that everything has changed. They decide to stay for the night, giving Van an entire day to weigh his options. If he wants more information, he can consult her directly. Van struggles to maintain his poker face, stunned that the girls are staying over. Panamera laughs, noting that he finally looks like a real boy instead of a cold tactician. Everything he said previously felt far too mature for a child. Van then inquires if their soldiers will also be staying within the village. Panamera reminds him they are in enemy territory. She jokingly claims a weak woman like herself needs protection, though Van knows she is one of the most powerful warriors he's ever met. Hammer asks Arut what she plans to do, and she suggests staying at Van's house. Blushing furiously, Arut wonders if living under the same roof is even appropriate. Van questions if Arut is truly prepared for such a step, especially considering she is only 10 years old. Panamera apologizes, noting that Arut is still just a kid and should probably room with her instead. She asks if there is even enough space in the house for them to stay the night. Van tells her not to worry. He'll simply construct a brand new hostel for them right this second. True to his word, Van immediately builds a massive hostel to accommodate Panamera and her entourage. He creates rooms designed for 4 soldiers each. Relieved they don't have to camp in the dirt, the men are overjoyed and accept a formal invitation for a grand dinner. His maid asks if the scaly wolf meat is suitable for the feast. Van agrees, curious if the exotic meat will actually taste good. Orto's crew has been hunting mystic beasts, and the armored dragon's presence has drawn even more creatures to the village. After wiping out a pack of scaly wolves, they now have a massive surplus of high-quality meat. The maid promises to cook a legendary meal for him, even mentioning his potential marriage to Arut. Van asks if she is truly comfortable with that arrangement. She admits it's a bit bittersweet, but she believes Arut will be a great support for him. She is more than happy to serve them both as a married couple. She adds that if Arut proves to be a capable woman, she will easily earn her place by his side. Kamsen chimes in, suggesting that a powerhouse like Panamera would be a better match. Van realizes then and there that Kamsen has a serious thing for dominant women. The old man agrees with Panamera's assessment. Since Arut can't use 4 elemental magic, she is useless to Graf, making Van realize she was exiled just like he was. Their nation, the Scuderia Kingdom, has been aggressively expanding its borders for 5 years, leaving neighboring countries trembling in fear. Because of this rapid expansion, the king is desperate to avoid any internal conflicts between his allies. Van ponders if there is any way to escape this political predicament. The man reveals that several ruthless methods exist to handle the situation. He suggests crushing them economically through territorial expansion or aggressive military action. From stripping their rights to outright sabotage, the options are endless. Van admits that such cold-blooded tactics are truly terrifying. He insists that regardless of the political fallout, Eret's personal choice remains the priority. She can live in the village free from the pressure of marriage or leave whenever she wishes. Realizing they haven't truly spoken, he decides to clear the air during dinner. Soon enough, the evening meal begins. Van breaks the ice by asking Eret if the food is to her liking. He promises to prepare something even sweeter once they secure more ingredients, leaving her stunned. Hesitantly, she replies that the meat and fruit salad are absolutely delicious. Flustered and unaccustomed to such warmth, she bumbles through her words while meeting his gaze. It is clear why even someone as formidable as Panamera recognized his extraordinary qualities. She feels incredibly lucky to have met him. Just as Van asks what she does for fun, Eret shyly admits that she has a profound love for cute things. Van wonders if that includes small, adorable animals like cats. She clarifies her passion for dolls and flowers, basically anything beautiful that stays still. Van mentions that he hasn't actually seen any dolls in this region yet. He asks for a showcase later, leaving Eret completely floored by Van's overwhelming gentleness. Exuding a tranquil yet commanding presence, Van possesses the maturity of a seasoned man. Despite being younger, he waits for her to speak with absolute composure. She mentions the dolls are safe in the carriage, promising to show them to him tomorrow. He offers her a charming word of thanks while they enjoy their dinner together. Aret finds her conversation with Van both exhilarating and deeply moving. It is a bizarre, unexplainable sensation that she can't quite put into words. Her face turns a deep crimson as she blushes intensely after their lengthy exchange. She is clearly growing comfortable around him and feels a desperate urge to keep talking. She longs to initiate a real dialogue and gaze directly into his eyes while they are alone. There is a question burning in her mind as they continue their casual dinner talk. However, Arat loses her nerve and fails to speak up. Later, Panemra notes how peaceful and secure the village feels. The meal is so exquisite that one wonders how he sourced such a vast array of rare ingredients and spices. It is clear the citizens hold Van in the highest possible regard. Van credits Till's incredible cooking for the feast, but Penemra insists he should boast more about the village's sudden prosperity. Van humbly attributes the growth to the citizens' hard work, claiming he will only be truly proud once the population exceeds 1,000. Van turns his attention back toward Arit. She promises he will see the collection first thing tomorrow. Van quickly senses that Arit is holding something back and asks if there is something she needs. Arit stands frozen in silence for 5 long minutes, trembling as she struggles to find her voice. Finally, she thanks Van, admitting she was terrified of their potential marriage until she realized what a kind soul he truly is. Overwhelmed, she blurts out a quick goodnight and bolts away. Even Van begins to wonder if he managed to make a decent impression. While rushing back to the hostel, Arut worries she spoke too fast and fled before hearing a response. She fears her behavior was impolite and worries Van might think she's strange. Upon arriving, she struggles to find her room. Fortunately, a lady is there to point her in the right direction. Entering the room, she finds Panamera already there in her nightwear, asking if she's finally returned. Irut gazes at Panamera, wondering if she is the literal embodiment of beauty. Panamera teases her, asking if they crossed any lines due to their chemistry. She tells Irut to speak up if she has a proposal, leaving the girl flustered and hiding her face. According to the plan, they should leave tomorrow, but they decide to extend their stay for a few more days. Alred agrees to stay, while Panamera notes that these people could look after them indefinitely. They offer gold coins for their stay, deciding to pay for a full week to accommodate their large group. Later, Irut takes a shower and hops into bed, determined to properly speak with Van tomorrow. Gazing out the window, she prays he will listen to her. For the first time in ages, she feels a genuine sense of anticipation. She can hardly wait for the sun to rise. The next morning, Van announces to his people that the fortress construction will be directed by Espada. Since this is their first major project, he urges them to be cautious. Given the massive scale, he tells them to take their time and avoid any injuries. The team expresses their gratitude to everyone providing the necessary materials. When Van asks Ordo about his plans, Ordo just laughs it off, claiming he's only just getting started. He notes that the villagers are lining up like disciplined soldiers. They set out to hunt mystical beasts again, a task made trivial by their powerful new swords. Van explains that while poor quality materials fetch less, high-grade spoils can be sold to Mr. Bell for a premium. Van encourages teamwork and safety. Since it's Friday, he announces a massive 2-day barbecue feast using their fresh haul. Van's words ignite a fire in the crowd, encouraging everyone to get to work as a massive cheer erupts. Villagers who were once quiet and reserved have transformed into energetic workers ready to give it their all. Panamera approaches Van with a morning greeting, noting that his speech was certainly an interesting way to lead. While they aren't a formal military, it's a brilliant way to boost morale. Van explains that since they aren't soldiers, freedom is their greatest motivator. He promises extra alcohol to the top 10 performers, giving the drinkers a massive incentive to hustle. Panamera agrees, admitting even she would work harder for a deal like that. Arud then makes her appearance, approaching Van with a polite greeting, which he quickly returns. She strikes up a conversation, remarking that the beautiful weather surely signals a productive day ahead. Van notices that Arud is overflowing with energy, and asks if she's fully recovered from the exhaustion of her journey. Arud catches herself and slows her pace, claiming she has more than enough power to get through the day. Expressing a desire to see the world through Van's eyes, she asks if she can observe his work firsthand. She is eager to understand his methods better. Van agrees, and the group heads off to their next destination. Panamera asks what the next project is, perhaps another massive castle wall. To her surprise, Van reveals they are actually tackling the sewage system today. He explains that sewage pipes run deep beneath every building and must be regularly flushed with pressurized water from the moat. By utilizing the natural slope, they prevent the city from becoming unsanitary and spreading deadly diseases. The waste flows into specialized underground cavities before eventually being filtered back into the river. As they get closer, Panamera and Arud are left in total shock by the sheer scale of the operation as they witness the water being sent deep underground. Panamera has never seen such advanced engineering in her life and is left completely speechless. The ape men living nearby praise Van for the delicious food he provides, but then a girl named Lad drops a bombshell, claiming she is Van's wife. Utterly horrified, Panamera spins toward Van and asks if he's actually married to an ape man. Van clarifies the situation, explaining it was all a massive misunderstanding. He tells Latapiela that he already cleared things up with her father. They aren't engaged at all. This revelation infuriates Latapiela, and she dives back into the water in a huff. The other Avgallu scold Van, telling him he really fumbled his interaction with her. Van mentions he has delicious food prepared, but if they're going to be difficult, he'll just keep it for himself. Instantly, the Avgallu change their tune, declaring their love for Van and begging for fruit. Van promises to send some later as they get back to work fixing the sewage system. Van informs them that the area is now closed for the day. They ask if this is a daily chore, and Van confirms it needs to be done several times a day. The Avgallu confidently take over, earning a sincere thank you from Van. Panamera is stunned, asking how Van can control the Avgallu like this. Van explains they've become residents for various reasons, while Panamera finds the mythical species and their children surprisingly adorable. Moving to the castle wall, Van is impressed by the progress, noting it's exactly what he expected from Espada. Van praises the old man for his incredible speed, having already finished 30 meters. Espada notes the flat surfaces are easy, but the upcoming angles will be a challenge. Van suggests they start by sketching a massive hexagonal perimeter on the ground. He acknowledges Espada's skill, knowing that without a competent leader, this project would be a disaster. Van tries to recall his trigonometry to determine the diagonal angles and center the village. Panamera watches him calculate the angles, questioning the hexagonal design, but Van simply asks what the issue is. Panamera offers her assistance, suggesting they use ropes to measure the lengths and draw an accurate diagram for the foundation. She departs with her bodyguard, leaving Arad alone with Van. Van wonders if she's truly okay without her protection detail. He decides to take it as a gesture of trust, suggesting they work on reinforcing the castle walls while the surveying continues. Van leads Arat to the ballista, and she stares at the massive weapon in absolute shock. He explains it's essentially a gargantuan bow and arrow designed to decimate any threat to the village. The wall's summit is widened to accommodate the massive weapon, which fires bolts the size of a man's arm from a 2-tier system. He originally considered a crossbow but didn't want to risk a failure. After all, he's still a young man who refuses to look bad in front of 2 beautiful girls. Arat is stunned, finding the situation unthinkable, and begs Kamsin to let him test it out. With that, they release the trigger, launching a massive bolt from the ballista. Till admires the craftsmanship, while Arat is shocked that a bow could possess such devastating power. Van explains it's the nature of a ballista, but Till insists it's only this strong because Van built it. Panamera rushes onto the scene, startled by the thunderous noise and fearing a high-level magical beast is on the prowl. Van clarifies it was just a test shot for their newly installed defense. Panamera is floored by the sound alone, questioning if the weapon can truly reach the distant forest. She looks toward the fortifications, asking if these powerful ballistas are also stationed along the walls. Van confirms they are, noting that over 100 units already line the defensive perimeter with more to come. Panamera is speechless, demanding to know how he produced such advanced weaponry using the same materials as common houses. Panamera is now completely obsessed with uncovering the secrets of the ballista. Van politely declines her inquiries, stating that the technology is a strictly guarded military secret. Acknowledging the boundary, Panamera offers to buy the weapon at any price, but Van stands firm, explaining they aren't for sale. They will only consider a deal if they are absolutely certain she is a permanent ally. Panamera is taken aback, realizing that Van never ceases to surprise her with his boldness. She reflects on the village's impossible growth, and how Van has systematically overturned the fundamental laws of production magic, earning the loyalty of every race. Even the once timid Aret is now stepping forward, emboldened to act on his own. In this young boy she feels a fresh wind of change that she hasn't felt in an eternity. With a look of resolve, Viscount Panamera Carrera Kian makes her stance clear. She officially offers to form a high-level alliance with Van. She prepares to send a report to the capital immediately. While most internal alliances are made for simple protection, she emphasizes that this will be a 50-50 alliance between equals. By declaring herself Van's ally to the kingdom's nobility, she is effectively staking her entire life and title on his success. Panamera, a rising noble without land, makes a bold promise that would leave most lords skeptical. For Van, who lacks any real noble connections, this represents a golden opportunity. Van accepts the proposal, declaring it an honor to have Panamera as his ally. He expresses his gratitude, carefully assessing the weight of this new partnership. Aaron bows in respect, though Van feels such formalities are unnecessary between them. This marks their very first official collaboration, a truly historic moment. Panamera proposes a trade. She wants one of his ballistae in exchange for 100 elite soldiers for 2 weeks. Van even guarantees that if a single soldier is lost, he will personally compensate for the loss. Knowing Panamera's reputation, Van realizes these troops are likely elite warriors who can fortify the village. He agrees to the deal but questions how she'll transport the heavy weapon and its ammunition. Panamera notes they'll need a sturdy carriage and plans to forge the iron bolts themselves. Kamsin suggests she take some of Van's custom arrows, sparking Panamera's curiosity. To explain, Kamsin reveals the incredible sword Van crafted specifically for him. It's a masterpiece of iron, heavy and formidable. Kamzan was so moved by its quality that he actually wept during training. Van realizes Kamzan harbors a deep emotional loyalty toward Panamera, revealing a whole new side to the man.